Welcome back to the YouTube channel Doctor's Wisdom Share. If we rely only on biological factors, that is, on genetic inheritance, then the question arises, what is the maximum lifespan of human beings? This question did not appear only recently. A very long time ago, in Eastern folk culture, people had already asked this question, but in a very different way. It is said that in ancient times, human beings once went to ask mother-in-law. Human beings asked her why humans are born with such a short lifespan, and why life is so brief. But the story actually begins before that, when mother-in-law created human beings and all living creatures. During the process of creating all things, she forgot one very important detail. She did not specify how many years humans and animals were allowed to live. And what was the consequence of that? The consequence was that after being born, humans and animals died one after another very quickly. They died without understanding why they were dying, and they died within a very short period of time. This created an enormous sense of fear during the Age of Chaos, the period when the universe had just been formed and human beings had only just appeared. During that time, fear of death spread everywhere. Human beings were deeply afraid that a life which had just begun would immediately come to an end. For this reason, human beings went to mother-in-law to ask her. They asked why humans were born with such a short lifespan, and how many years mother-in-law intended humans to live. At that moment, mother-in-law answered, if human beings lived according to their natural lifespan, they would only be able to live for 25 years. When they heard the number 25 years, human beings were terrified, because clearly, living only 25 years in this world was far too short. But mother-in-law continued speaking. She said that during those 25 years, human beings would be allowed to eat whatever they wanted, without needing to ask anyone, and without needing anyone's permission. Human beings would also be allowed to do whatever they wanted, again without asking anyone. Hearing this, human beings began to think again. They thought that if, within 25 years, they could have complete freedom, eat the things they liked, and do the things they wanted, then 25 years might not actually be so bad. After thinking this way, human beings stepped aside, making room for the other animals to come forward one by one to ask mother-in-law. After human beings stepped aside, it was the turn of the other animals to come forward and ask mother-in-law. The first animal to step forward was the horse. The horse asked the same questions that humans had just asked. They asked how many years horses would be allowed to live, what they would be allowed to eat, and what they would be required to do throughout that lifespan. Mother-in-law looked at the horse and replied. She said that horses would be allowed to live for 30 years. When the horse heard this, it felt that it was acceptable, because 30 years was longer than the 25 years given to humans. But then mother-in-law continued speaking about food and work. She said that during those 30 years, horses would be allowed to eat only grass, and there would be no other kinds of food available. And the work of horses was to pull carts for humans, and to allow humans to ride on their backs, traveling from one place to another. When this was said, not only the horse, but even the humans standing nearby, began to feel that something was not quite right. At that moment, humans stepped in and spoke up. They said that living for 30 years, while eating only grass, and having to pull carts, having to be ridden, and having to serve humans for an entire lifetime, then what was the point of living that long? The horse thought the same way. It thought for a while, then turned to mother-in-law and asked her, if that was the case, then the horse would like to give up some of its years. The horse said that it did not need to live for 30 years, and that it only wished to live for 15 years. Mother-in-law agreed. Immediately after that, the humans standing beside the horse made another request. They asked that if the horse did not use the remaining 15 years, then those years could be given to humans instead. Mother-in-law agreed once again. And so, from an original lifespan of only 25 years, human beings gained an additional 15 years, bringing their total lifespan to 40 years. Thus, from an initial lifespan of 25 years, human beings were given an additional 15 years, making a total of 40 years. If we look at it according to this division, from birth until about the age of 25, human beings live truly as human beings. This is the stage in which they are cared for, nurtured, loved, well fed, well dressed, and allowed to live according to their own wishes. But from the age of 25 to 40, human beings begin to enter the life of the horse. This is the stage when physical strength is still very good. People almost do not know what fatigue feels like. They can work from morning until night and still endure it. They can leave early and return late and still feel that everything is normal. Human beings throw themselves into society, struggling, colliding with reality, and doing all kinds of work. Some people start businesses. Some people fail. Some people rise and then fall again. All of these experiences are concentrated into this period. If we look back at the lives of many people, it is indeed true that from 25 to 40, human beings live exactly like horses. They pull work. They chase after tasks. They carry responsibilities. And they almost have no time left to think about themselves. After human beings had finished taking the years of the horse, it was the turn of the ox to step forward before mother-in-law. The ox asked the same familiar questions: how many years oxen would be allowed to live, what they would be allowed to eat, and what they would have to do throughout that lifespan. Mother-in-law looked at the ox and said that oxen were similar to horses in terms of food. They would also have no other choices, eating only straw and dry grass. But the work of oxen was different from that of horses. Horses could travel here and there, and could roam freely across many places. Oxen, however, could not. Oxen stay around ponds and fields, plying day after day, season after season. From one harvest to the next, their work was always the same: plying, pulling, and laboring to create wealth that sustained human beings. Because of this heavy and exhausting labor, mother-in-law granted oxen a lifespan of 40 years. When the ox heard the number 40 years, it was startled. The ox thought that if it had to live such a frugal life, eat poorly, stay in one place, and perform heavy labor for its entire life, then living 40 years was far too long and far too exhausting. Therefore, the ox asked to give up some of its years. The ox said that it only wished to live for 20 years. Mother-in-law agreed. Once again, the humans standing nearby made a request. They asked to take the 20 years that the ox did not use. Mother-in-law agreed again. And so, from the age of 40, human beings extended their lifespan to 60 years. If we look at it this way, from 40 to 60 years of age, human beings live the life of the ox. This is the stage when people have passed the age of impulsiveness. They no longer rush about like they did during the life of the horse. Instead, they become stable, responsible, and capable of long-term endurance. At this age, people work not to experiment, but to maintain. They work to support their families, to build their careers, and to preserve what they already have. Human beings between 40 and 60 resemble oxen in this way, working steadily, persistently, without showiness, without the need to roam, yet playing an extremely important role for both family and society. This is also the stage when human beings are considered the most mature. Their thinking is no longer shallow. Their decisions are no longer rushed. They know what should be kept and what should be let go. If we look back, many people who have the most stable careers and the most settled families also fall into this period from 40 to 60. After human beings had finished taking the years of the ox, it was the turn of the dog to step forward and ask mother-in-law. The dog asked the same three familiar questions: how many years it would be allowed to live, what it would be allowed to eat, and what it would have to do during that lifespan. Mother-in-law looked at the dog and said that dogs were small creatures and did not need to live for too long. She said that 30 years would be enough. But when it came to food, a problem arose. Human beings had already eaten all the good food. The grass had all been eaten by horses and oxen. There was no decent food left for the dog. In the end, mother-in-law said that the dog would have to eat the waste excreted by humans. Hearing this, the dog felt deeply saddened. Then mother-in-law continued speaking about the dog's work. Because its food was so poor, the dog's work would not be as physically demanding as that of horses or oxen. The dog would only need to guard the gate, watch the house, and protect the owner's property. At first glance, this sounded like an important job. But the dog thought again. Eating was miserable. Its life would be confined to the house. It would spend the entire day guarding and staying alert, unable to go anywhere, unable to do anything else. Because of this, the dog asked to give up part of its lifespan. The dog said that it only wished to live for 15 years. Mother-in-law agreed. And just as before, the humans standing nearby made another request. They asked to take the 15 years that the dog did not use. Mother-in-law nodded in agreement. And so, from 60 to 75 years of age, human beings live the life of the dog. If we look back at real life, this stage is very easy to recognize. From 60 to 75, people no longer care about elaborate food. Whatever their children and grandchildren eat, whatever remains, they simply eat that. They no longer think about cooking special meals for themselves. Work at this stage is no longer about creating wealth. Instead, it is about guarding the house, protecting the home, protecting possessions, and preserving order and routine. Many people at this age resemble dogs in this way. They worry far ahead, they hold on tightly, they fear loss, and they cling closely to what they have. From the house and the doors, to money and belongings, they spend the whole day around the house. When their children go out to work, they stay home to watch over things. Their role is no longer that of wealth creators, but of guardians, ensuring that the family does not fall into disorder. This is the life of the dog, lasting from 60 to 75 years of age. After human beings had finished taking the years of the dog, it was the turn of the chicken to step forward and ask mother-in-law. The chicken also asked the same three familiar questions: how many years it would be allowed to live, what it would be allowed to eat, and what it would have to do. Mother-in-law looked at the chicken and said that by this time, there was no proper food left at all. Human beings had eaten everything. Horses and oxen had eaten all the grass. Even waste was no longer left behind. Therefore, the chicken would have no choice but to scratch the ground, peck at weeds, and eat whatever it could find. As for work, there was nothing physically demanding. The chicken had only one task: to crow and keep time. From the third watch to the fifth watch of the night, it would crow to wake humans up and signal the beginning of a new day. In terms of lifespan, mother-in-law granted the chicken 20 years. But after hearing this, the chicken shook its head. Eating would be difficult. The work would be repetitive. Living that long would be meaningless. So the chicken asked to give up some years. It said that it only wished to live for 10 years. Mother-in-law agreed once again. And as before, human beings asked to take the remaining years. Thus, from 75 to 85 years of age, human beings live the life of the chicken. If we look at real life, this stage is very easy to recognize. In the evening, even before it is fully dark, people already feel exhausted. Their eyes feel heavy, their limbs feel weak. All they want is to lie down in bed. But once they lie down, they cannot sleep. They toss and turn, their minds filled with worries. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, sometimes even 4 or 5, they wake up again. After waking, they start waking their children and grandchildren, urging them, reminding them, afraid that they will be late for work, afraid that something might go wrong. At this stage, eating also changes. Rice or porridge feels almost the same. Meat and fish have to be minced or ground, because most of the teeth are already gone. The sense of taste fades away. Eating becomes a way to survive, rather than something to enjoy. This is the life of the chicken, lasting from 75 to 85 years of age. After the story of the chicken comes to an end, if we look back at the entire cycle of life, we can see one very clear thing. According to this folk narrative, human beings live a complete life up to about 85 years. From birth to 25 years old, this is the life of the human being. From 25 to 40 years old, this is the life of the horse. From 40 to 60 years old, this is the life of the ox. From 60 to 75 years old, this is the life of the dog. From 75 to 85 years old, this is the life of the chicken. Added together, if we look only at this way of telling the story, 85 years form a complete life cycle. But if we stop here, the story is still not finished. Because if we observe carefully, each life in this story is metaphorical, rather than a rigid numerical value. The horse does not represent only exactly 15 years. It represents a stage of peak labor and physical strength. The ox does not represent only exactly 20 years. It represents a stage of endurance, and long-term responsibility. The dog represents guarding, preserving, and protecting. The chicken represents a reversed biological rhythm, waking early and sleeping poorly. If we look at the story from this perspective, the ancients were not merely talking about age. They were talking about the biological cycles of the human body. And if we take that cycle and double it, meaning that a complete life cycle could repeat one more time, then 85 multiplied by 2 equals 170 years. If we then add biological variation and individual differences, the number falls into the range of approximately 170 to 175 years. That is why, when people talk about the maximum lifespan of human beings, the number most often mentioned is around 175 years, rather than 200 years, 300 years, or an unlimited lifespan. This is not an imaginary number. It appears simultaneously across multiple perspectives, from folk tradition, from biology, and from real-world statistical observations. If we look at reality, the longest-lived individuals recorded in modern history have lived only a little over 140 years. Scientists, when analyzing statistical data, also agree that the maximum human lifespan falls within a range from 120 to 175 years. Living beyond that range is extremely rare, and there is almost no solid evidence to confirm it. Thus, when we return to the original question, if we rely only on biological factors, that is, genetic inheritance, then what is the maximum lifespan of human beings? The answer is approximately 175 years. Not everyone can reach it. Not every society provides conditions that allow people to approach it. But this is the biological limit that human beings can aim toward if there is no extraordinary technological intervention. From here, the folk story is connected to science. And from science, we are forced to ask another question. If the biological limit is like that, then why are there countries where people live very long lives, while in other countries, life expectancy is much lower? At this point, the answer no longer lies in legend. It lies in living conditions, in the economy and society, in the environment, and in how human beings treat their own bodies. From that folk story, when we return to modern life, a very large concern naturally arises. This concern does not come from books. It comes from what we see every day, from movies, from newspapers, and from very ordinary life stories. During periods of free time, especially during the pandemic, many people watched movies, listened to music, and followed stories about other people's lives. Among them, there were some films that left a very strong impression. For example, there was a Korean film in which a character, an elderly man, was murdered. When the investigation was completed, his assets, if converted into money, were actually not very large. That amount of money, if compared with the cost of a court scanner used in healthcare, would not even be enough to buy one in full. In another film, there were characters who appeared very wealthy and successful, but when they spoke of their financial dreams, the amounts they mentioned, when viewed from today's perspective, were also not particularly large. Looking at this, many people begin to think that the material lives of people in those countries may not necessarily be more comfortable. In fact, the media often reports extensively on the pressures of living in Japan and South Korea. High work pressure, intense labor intensity, high rates of stress and depression. And yet, a natural question arises. Why is it that countries where people endure such high pressure and stress are among the countries with the highest life expectancy in the world? Meanwhile, some places that many people believe are more relaxed, with stronger family bonds, have significantly lower average life expectancy. Specifically, Japan is among the world's leading countries in life expectancy. South Korea is also in the top 10, with an average life expectancy close to 85 years. Therefore, differences in life expectancy cannot be explained by genetics alone. They also cannot be explained solely by folk culture or legend. At this point, the discussion must turn to science. And the science here is not abstract theory. It consists of very concrete, very everyday indicators. The life expectancy of a country depends not only on what people eat or think, but also on living conditions, income, levels of inequality, and how society organizes life for its people. From here, the story begins to move in a different direction. It is no longer the story of mother-in-law. It is no longer about horses, oxen, dogs, or chickens. It becomes the story of money, working hours, quality of life, and the level of stress that a society places on its people. Once we ask why life expectancy differs so greatly between countries, it becomes impossible to avoid looking at the real lives of ordinary people. If we want to quantify that life, in the end we must return to money. One very simple way to look at the life of a country is to look at income per capita, also known as GDP per capita. This means that, on average, people in those countries have more resources to take care of their health, to access medical services, to eat adequately, and to live in safer environments. When material living conditions are guaranteed at a certain level, life expectancy naturally increases. But income alone is still not enough to explain everything, because there are countries where income is not very low, yet life expectancy is still not high. At this point, we have to look at another indicator, which is the degree of income inequality, also known as the Gini coefficient. This index reflects the gap between the very rich and the very poor within the same society. The larger this gap is, the more unstable the society becomes, the greater the level of stress, and the more negatively public health is affected. This point is extremely important, because in a society with large income inequality, many people live in a constant state of anxiety, worrying about money, worrying about work, worrying about healthcare, and worrying about old age. This prolonged anxiety is itself a form of chronic stress, and it directly erodes health. But it does not stop there. There is another indicator that very few people pay attention to, yet it is extremely important. That indicator is the total number of working hours in a year. When people work too much and rest too little, the body does not have enough time to recover. Stress accumulates, fatigue accumulates, disease accumulates. As a result, life expectancy cannot be high. Therefore, when we put all these factors together, income, inequality, and working hours, the original question gradually begins to find its answer. Life expectancy is not just about how many years a person lives. Life expectancy is the result of how a society treats its people, from youth to old age. After going through social factors such as income inequality, and working hours, the discussion returns to a very fundamental factor, which is biology, or more specifically, genetic inheritance. Many people still believe that whether a person lives a long life or not is entirely determined by genes. However, when scientists studied this question more carefully, especially through research on twins, they discovered something different. Genetic inheritance does not determine everything. According to those studies, only about 30% of human lifespan is determined by genetics. In other words, even if two people have identical genetic makeup, their lifespans can still differ greatly if they live in different environments, have different diets, experience different levels of stress, and follow different lifestyles. Thus, the remaining 70% does not lie in genes. That 70% lies in living environment, social conditions, dietary patterns, daily habits, and in how people treat their own bodies and minds. For this reason, when asking about the maximum lifespan of human beings, to separate questions must be clearly distinguished. The first question is the biological limit, that is, if we consider only the body, cells, and genes, how many years can humans live at most? The second question is actual lifespan, that is, under the specific living conditions of each society and each country, how long do people actually live? Here, the question being asked is the first one. If we rely only on biological factors, only on genetic inheritance, without considering society, economics, or the environment, then what is the maximum lifespan of human beings? This is not an emotional question. It has been asked for a very long time, and many different approaches have been taken to answer. Some approaches are based on historical reality, looking at how long the longest-lived humans actually lived. Some approaches come from developmental biology, looking at the growth period of the human body. Others come from cellular biology, looking at the number of times human cells can divide. What is interesting is that, regardless of the approach, the final numbers all converge on the same range. That range is not 100 years. It is not 120 years. It falls roughly between 120 and 175 years. To answer the question of the maximum human lifespan more clearly, we first have to look at what has actually happened in the real world, rather than relying only on theory. There is one case recorded in the Guinness World Records. This case involves an elderly man who lived in Indonesia. He was born at the end of the 19th century and passed away in the year 2016. When calculated, he lived for more than 140 years, specifically 146 years. This is the longest human lifespan that has been officially recorded up to the present time. So far, no one has been confirmed to surpass the age of 146 years with complete documentation and official recognition. When scientists examine this data, they do not look at just one individual. They look at the entire distribution of human lifespans. From that data, they observe that most people who live exceptionally long lives tend to fall within the range of 120 to 130 years. Living beyond 140 years is already extremely rare. Based on this, scientists propose a reasonable range for the maximum human lifespan, which is from 120 to 175 years. The number 175 is not chosen arbitrarily. It appears when real-world data is combined with biological models of human development and aging. If we look only at historical records, humans rarely live beyond 140 to 150 years. But if we look at biological potential, that is, the maximum capacity of cells and genes, the biological ceiling may be higher than that. And the number that many biological models converge on is approximately 175 years. This also explains why, despite advances in science, average human lifespan increases only slowly, and no one has clearly surpassed this limit. Thus, if we consider biological factors alone, it can be said that humans are very unlikely to live beyond 175 years without completely revolutionary scientific interventions. However, to truly understand why this number appears, we cannot look only at Guinness records. We must look deeper into how the human body develops, into the duration of growth, and into how human cells divide over time. From here, the discussion begins to shift in another direction: developmental biology, and the way scientists use the period of maturation to estimate the maximum lifespan. After discussing real-world record numbers, science does not stop at asking how many years humans can live. It asks another question: what does it actually mean to be old? Here, there is a very important classification proposed by the World Health Organization. According to this classification, before the age of 65, human beings are not considered old. In other words, before 65, people are still classified as young, or at least not yet truly old. This perspective is very different from the common belief held by many people. Many people think that 50 is already old, that 55 is already old. But according to this classification, 65 is the true starting point of old age. From 65 to 75 years of age, people are considered to be entering old age. This is a transitional stage in which biological aging becomes more apparent, but the body still retains relatively good adaptive capacity. Only from the age of 75 onward are people considered to be truly old. When we place these age markers side by side, a very thought-provoking observation emerges. From this perspective, the issue of lifespan is not merely about living longer, but about extending the period of life with quality. When viewed this way, numbers such as 120, 150, or 175 no longer feel distant or abstract, but instead become theoretical milestones based on how the human body actually functions. From here, science continues to go deeper. It no longer stops at statistics or age classification, but moves toward a very fundamental question: when does the human body stop developing? In other words, how long is the human growth period, and how is it related to maximum lifespan? This question was raised long ago by a French scientist, and from it emerged a very influential biological viewpoint. When science began to ask about the limits of human life, a French naturalist proposed a particularly noteworthy idea. He did not observe only human beings, but all vertebrate animals, especially mammals. Through these observations, he discovered a pattern. This pattern was not based on intuition, but on the duration of growth of each species. According to this viewpoint, the average lifespan of a mammal is often several times longer than its growth period. So what is the growth period? The growth period is the span of time during which the body is still developing, still maturing, and still growing biologically. For humans, if we speak very simply, 18 years of age is often considered adulthood in a social sense. But biologically, the body is not yet fully mature at that point. In reality, it is not until around the age of 25 that most organs and systems of the body reach relatively complete development. There is a very specific biological marker used to determine the end of the growth period, and that marker is the final tooth. The last tooth to erupt in humans is the wisdom tooth, also known as the eighth tooth. Some people have all four wisdom teeth. Some have only one or two. Some never develop any at all. But the important point is not the number of wisdom teeth, but the timing of the eruption of the last one. That moment marks the end of the growth period. For most people, this occurs between the ages of 18 and 25. If we take this growth period as a reference point and multiply it according to the rule observed by that scientist, the maximum human lifespan begins to take shape. According to his observations, the lifespan of mammals is usually about 5 to 7 times their growth period. If we apply this rule to humans, then the following results emerge. If we take 18 years as the end of the growth period and multiply it by 7, we obtain approximately 126 years. If we take 25 years as the end of the growth period and multiply it by 7, we obtain approximately 175 years. This range, from roughly 120 to 175 years, once again coincides with what has been recorded in reality and what appears in other biological models. This is highly noteworthy because it shows that, whether approached from folklore, from statistical data, or from developmental biology, the final numbers all converge on the same range. Human beings cannot live forever, but human beings do have a biological ceiling. And that ceiling lies between approximately 120 and 175 years. From here, science continues to go even deeper. It no longer stops at growth periods, but moves directly to the cellular level, where lifespan is truly determined day by day, hour by hour, and division by division. After discussing the viewpoint based on growth duration, science continues to go deeper, no longer stopping at the level of the whole body, but moving directly to the cellular level. Here, a very important name appears, that of Hayflick, an American scientist. Around the 1960s, when he was studying human cells, he discovered something very remarkable. He observed that human body cells are not able to divide infinitely. Before that, people believed that cells could keep dividing forever, as long as conditions were good enough. But Hayflick found that this was not the case. He studied somatic cells, that is, the cells that make up the skin, muscles, bones, organs, and all the structures that form the human body. He discovered that each of these cells can divide only about 50 to 60 times, no more than that. After approximately 50 to 60 cycles of cell division, the cell can no longer divide normally. If it attempts to divide further, the cell becomes abnormal, pathological, or cancerous. At that point, the immune system must eliminate it. This discovery is known as the Hayflick limit. Now, if we use this limit to estimate lifespan, the picture becomes very clear once again. Each cycle of division of human somatic cells lasts approximately 2.42 to 0.75 years. If we multiply 2.42 to 0.75 years by 50 to 60 division cycles, we once again obtain a number that falls within the range of 120 to 175 years. Once again, it is the same range we have encountered before. At this point, we can see that folklore, developmental biology, and cellular biology all converge on the same limit. This is not a coincidence. It is because the human body is programmed in this way. To make this easier to imagine, we can think of it like this. Each cell is like a cup. When the body needs new cells, that cup duplicates itself, becoming two identical cups. That is one cell division. But that cup cannot duplicate itself endlessly. After about 50 to 60 times, the rim of the cup is no longer intact, and it can no longer create a complete copy. At that point, the cell either stops dividing or is eliminated. And it is from this point that biological aging truly begins. The body can no longer regenerate as well as before. The skin becomes thinner, muscles weaken, bones become more brittle, organs function less efficiently, not because humans want to grow old, but because the cells have reached their limit. After understanding the Hayflick limit, science is forced to take one more step. Because if cells can divide only 50 to 60 times, then the question arises, why only that many times, and what causes cells to gradually lose their ability to divide? The answer lies in a very small structure, but one that plays an extremely important role, located at the ends of chromosomes. Here, a concept is introduced, called the telomere. Telomeres are located at both ends of each chromosome. They are like caps, protective tips, whose function is to protect the DNA inside. To make this easier to imagine, think of a shoelace. At both ends of a shoelace, there is always a plastic or metal tip. Without those tips, after some use, the shoelace would fray, unravel, and eventually become useless. Chromosomes work in the same way. Inside them are DNA strands that carry genetic information. Without telomeres protecting both ends, during cell division, DNA would be damaged, lose segments, or undergo mutations. Therefore, the role of telomeres is to keep chromosomes from fraying, from becoming damaged during each round of cell division. However, telomeres have a very important characteristic. That characteristic is, each time a cell divides, the telomeres become slightly shorter. They do not shorten dramatically, but gradually, little by little. It is estimated that with each cell division, a telomere loses about 25 to 200 nucleotide base pairs. These nucleotides repeat in a specific sequence, and it is this repetition that forms the telomere. The problem is that telomeres are not infinitely long. They are like the protective tip of a shoelace with a limited length. They wear down, and eventually run out. When telomeres become too short to adequately protect the DNA, what happens then? At that point, the cell can no longer divide safely. If it tries to divide, DNA errors and mutations occur. When that happens, the immune system recognizes such cells as dangerous. Either the cell is destroyed, or if it is not eliminated in time, it may become a cancer cell. Therefore, when telomeres shorten to a critical length, cells enter a state of senescence or undergo programmed cell death. This is the deep biological mechanism behind the process of aging. Not because humans choose to grow old, but because telomeres have been worn down over decades of cell division. If we return to the earlier cup analogy, then telomeres are like the rim of the cup. With each duplication, the rim chips slightly. It chips little by little, until one day the cup can no longer be used. Thus, the biological lifespan of humans is essentially determined by two closely linked factors. The first is the number of times cells can divide, the Hayflick limit. The second is the rate at which telomeres are worn down with each division. If telomeres wear down quickly, cells age quickly. If telomeres wear down slowly, cells age slowly. From here, science raises another very important question. If telomeres determine the speed of aging, is there any way to slow down the shortening of telomeres? Or even further, is there any way to lengthen telomeres? This question led to a major turning point in modern biomedical research, and that turning point was recognized with a Nobel Prize. When science reached the topic of telomeres, the story entered an entirely new phase. Because before that, people only knew that telomeres shorten over time, and when they shorten to a certain point, cells age, the body ages, and eventually the life cycle ends. But a crucial question was raised: do telomeres only shorten, or can they be lengthened? This question was pursued by many scientists for years, and in 2009, a breakthrough discovery was recognized with the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. The prize was awarded to a group of scientists who discovered telomerase and clarified the role of telomeres in protecting chromosomes. So what is telomerase? Telomerase is an enzyme that has the ability to add back the telomere segments lost during cell division. Simply put, if telomeres are like the protective tips of shoelaces, then telomerase is like a craftsman who continuously repairs those tips, preventing them from fraying too quickly. This discovery completely changed the way science views aging, because before that, it was believed that telomere shortening was irreversible. But with telomerase, scientists realized that, at least in theory, telomeres could be maintained, and under certain conditions, could even be lengthened. This became especially clear when scientists observed germ cells, reproductive cells, and cancer cells. These cells exhibit very high telomerase activity. Because telomerase is highly active, these cells can divide almost indefinitely. And this is precisely why cancer cells are so dangerous. They do not age. They do not die. They divide uncontrollably. Thus, the same mechanism that can extend telomeres can either slow aging if properly controlled, or lead to dangerous diseases if it becomes uncontrolled. From this, science understands that telomerase is like a double-edged sword. On one hand, it opens the possibility of extending lifespan. On the other hand, it poses a serious risk of cancer and biological imbalance. Therefore, telomere extension cannot be done arbitrarily. It cannot be as simple as taking a pill or eating a particular food and suddenly having longer telomeres. It is an extremely complex process involving gene regulation, control of cell division, the immune system, and the overall biological balance of the body. For this reason, even though telomerase was discovered in 2009, science has still not been able to safely apply it to make humans live forever or remain young indefinitely. However, this discovery opened a very important door. At the very least, human beings have identified the key to aging. And from here, a more practical question is raised. If we cannot yet actively lengthen telomeres through technology, do lifestyle stress, emotions, and daily habits affect the rate at which telomeres are worn down? In other words, can we live in a way that makes telomeres shorten more slowly, even if we cannot yet make them longer? This question leads directly to a topic that is very close to everyday life, which is stress, hormones, and the way human beings accelerate their own aging. When talking about whether telomeres wear down quickly or slowly, it is impossible not to mention stress, because stress is not merely a feeling in the mind. It is a very specific chain of biological reactions in the body. When a person enters a state of stress, anxiety, or fear, the body immediately activates the adrenal glands. These glands secrete two very important hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline makes the heart beat faster. Blood pressure rises. Breathing becomes more rapid. Cortisol does something different. It mobilizes energy. In order to generate energy to cope with stress, the body must increase blood sugar levels. Glucose is released into the bloodstream to supply fuel for the brain, the heart, and the muscles. In the short term, this mechanism is necessary. Without adrenaline and cortisol, humans would not be able to respond quickly to danger. But the problem arises when stress becomes prolonged. When stress is no longer a matter of minutes or hours, but lasts for months or even years, the body never truly rests. At that point, cortisol remains constantly elevated. Blood sugar remains high. Blood pressure remains high. The heart is forced to work continuously. And most importantly, cells are constantly being forced to operate under pressure. When cells need more energy, metabolism increases. Increased metabolism produces more free radicals. More free radicals lead to oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is one of the major causes of DNA damage and accelerated telomere shortening. Each time a cell divides under conditions of chronic stress, telomeres do not shorten only at the normal rate, but shorten more rapidly than usual. In other words, stress does not merely make people feel tired. It actively accelerates biological aging. If under normal conditions, one cell division cycle lasts about 2.4 to 2.7 years, then under prolonged stress, that cycle may become shorter. Cells are forced to divide more frequently to compensate for accumulated damage. More divisions mean faster telomere erosion, and in this way, the aging loop accelerates. That is why it is very easy to observe that people who live constantly in anxiety, pressure, sadness, and resentment tend to age very quickly. Their skin wrinkles faster. Their hair turns gray more quickly. Their bodies weaken sooner. Not because they eat less, but because their endocrine system is perpetually under stress. By contrast, when people live in a relaxed, joyful, and content state, the body secretes different hormones. The brain releases dopamine. The body releases endogenous endorphins. These hormones make people feel comfortable, happy, and relaxed. In this state, cells are not forced to operate at excessive levels. Cell division cycles proceed more slowly and naturally. Telomeres are worn down more slowly. In other words, living happily is not just a slogan. It is a biological strategy for slowing down aging. From here, the discussion naturally moves to a very practical issue of everyday life, a slower lifestyle, stress management, and how human beings protect their own lifespan. When talking about slowing down the aging process, the discussion ultimately returns to something that seems very simple, yet is extremely difficult to practice, which is slowing down. Slowing down does not mean doing nothing. Slowing down means not keeping the body and the mind in a constantly pressured state. In modern life, human beings must make an enormous number of decisions every day, from very small things, such as what time to wake up, what to eat for breakfast, how to commute to work, to much larger decisions related to work, money, and family. It is estimated that every day, a person makes tens of thousands of decisions. When everything happens too quickly, too intensely, and too continuously, the brain has no time to rest. When the brain does not rest, stress hormones are released continuously. And when stress hormones are released continuously, telomeres wear down more quickly. By contrast, when a person knows how to slow down, the body begins to shift into a different state. At that point, the brain is no longer in a state of constant high alert. Instead of adrenaline and cortisol, the body begins to release dopamine and endorphins, hormones associated with satisfaction, relaxation, and happiness. These hormones do not make the heart beat faster. They do not raise blood pressure. On the contrary, they help stabilize the body. When the body is stable, cells are not forced to divide excessively. Cell division cycles proceed more naturally. Telomeres are worn down more slowly. Therefore, slowing down is not merely a psychological concept. It is a direct biological intervention in the speed of aging. If we observe carefully, we will find that many elderly people who live long lives share a common trait. They are not in a hurry. They do not compete aggressively. They do not keep their minds in constant motion. They can walk slowly. They can cook a simple meal. They can sit, listen to music, drink tea, and look at trees. These seemingly ordinary activities are actually what allow their bodies to rest. By contrast, people who live in a constant state of urgency, even when they are still young, tend to age very quickly, not because they work hard, but because they never allow themselves to stop. Slowing down also means knowing how to wait. There are things that do not need to be solved immediately. There are decisions that can be postponed until tomorrow. When people allow themselves to wait, the brain exits the state of constant stress. That pause is when the body repairs itself and restores balance. And that is also when telomeres are better protected. If we look more broadly, many life philosophies found in religions and ancient cultures point human beings in the same direction. It is not by chance that people who live simply, with fewer desires and less competition, often live longer. Not because they have better genes, but because they do not push their bodies to their limits too early. From here, the discussion moves to another factor that is extremely concrete and closely tied to daily life, which is diet. Because in addition to mental state, what human beings put into their bodies every day directly affects the speed of aging, telomeres, and lifespan. When we talk about slowing down life and mental state, we cannot avoid talking about eating, because this is something people face every single day. Eating is not just about being full or hungry. It is about how the body is nourished over the course of many decades. There is a very familiar saying, "You are what you eat." It sounds correct, but if understood too simplistically, it can be misleading. Eating a large amount of foods advertised as healthy or beneficial does not automatically make the body younger or extend lifespan. Because once food enters the body, passes through the stomach, the intestines, the liver, and the digestive enzyme system, it is no longer in its original form. Proteins, whether collagen or any other type, are broken down into amino acids. Only then does the body use those amino acids to synthesize what it actually needs. There is no such thing as eating collagen and having collagen go directly to the skin. There is also no such thing as eating a particular substance and having telomeres automatically lengthen. Therefore, advertisements that claim eat this to become younger or drink that to reverse aging greatly oversimplify an extremely complex biological process. The real issue is not what magical thing to eat, but how to eat in a way that does not push the body into accelerated aging. The first thing that must be mentioned is energy. Modern society presents a very clear paradox. Human beings consume excess energy, but lack micronutrients. In the past, people lacked calories, but did not lack micronutrients. Vegetables, fish, shellfish, and natural water were readily available. Today, the situation is reversed. Rice, bread, meat, sweets, fried foods, energy intake is abundant. But calcium, magnesium, zinc, iron, and vitamins are often insufficient. When energy intake is excessive, the body must process large amounts of sugar and fat. This process generates many free radicals. Free radicals cause oxidative stress. Oxidative stress damages DNA and accelerates telomere shortening. Micronutrients, on the other hand, are essential for repair. For example, magnesium participates in many biological reactions, including those involved in DNA repair. If micronutrients are lacking, the body does not have enough raw materials to repair the small damages that accumulate every day. Over many years, those small unrepaired damages become premature aging, chronic disease, and shortened lifespan. The second issue is overeating. Many people have the habit of eating until they are very full, believing that eating a lot makes them stronger. But when a person overeats, the body must divert a large amount of blood and oxygen to the digestive system. The brain receives less oxygen. The heart must work harder. The entire body enters a state of fatigue. Ancient wisdom expressed this clearly. Out of 10 parts, one should eat only 7. Eat enough not to be hungry, but not so much that the stomach is distended. When eating is moderate, the body is not overloaded, cells are not forced to work excessively, and aging proceeds more slowly. The third issue is food quality. Fried foods, foods high in oil, high in sugar, and high in saturated fat all increase oxidative stress. Eating them once or twice is not a problem, but eating them repeatedly over many years forces cells to pay a price. Telomeres are not worn down by a single meal, but by thousands of improper meals repeated over time. Therefore, eating for longevity does not mean eating extravagantly. It means eating in balance, eating in moderation, and eating in a way that allows the body time to repair itself. When talking about eating for longevity, it is impossible to avoid a very current issue, which is dietary supplements and advertising. Today, if you open a newspaper, scroll through social media, or watch just a few minutes of advertisements, you will see countless products being promoted as capable of rejuvenating the body, extending lifespan, or even reversing aging entirely. Some products claim that simply taking them will make the skin firm, the hair dark again, and the body young once more. Other products claim that they contain special ingredients capable of reversing the aging process, lengthening telomeres, and making cells young again. It all sounds very attractive, but if we look back carefully at everything science has shown so far, one thing becomes immediately clear. If there truly existed a drug or a food that could safely and effectively lengthen telomeres, it would have caused a medical revolution. It would not remain confined to a few scattered advertisements. The reality is that, up to the present time, no food or supplement has been conclusively proven to directly make humans younger or significantly extend lifespan. Substances such as collagen, vitamins, and minerals, when used correctly and in appropriate amounts, can only help the body function better within normal biological limits. They cannot surpass the Hayflick limit. They cannot cause cells to divide infinitely. They cannot magically lengthen telomeres. In fact, there are cases where excessive use of supplements, or improper use, forces the liver and kidneys to work beyond capacity, leading to damage, disease, and shortened lifespan. One very important thing must be understood. The human body does not lack medicine. What it lacks is balance. When balance is lost, people turn to medicine and supplements, hoping for a quick solution. But biology has no shortcuts. There is no pill that can compensate for decades of poor diet, poor lifestyle choices, and chronic stress. Advertisements claiming that using a single product can make a person younger or extend lifespan play directly on the fear of aging and the fear of death. And that fear, if left unmanaged, becomes a form of stress itself, which further accelerates telomere erosion. Therefore, rather than chasing advertisements, it is far more important to understand the biological limits of the body, to understand that there is no elixir of immortality, to understand that there is no simple way to bypass biological laws. When people truly understand this, they become less anxious, less obsessed with unnecessary things, and as a result, they live more lightly. And living more lightly is itself one of the most effective ways to slow down the aging process. From here, the discussion returns to a very fundamental point. Longevity is not something that can be bought with money. Longevity is also not something that can be extended by a few products or supplements. Longevity is the result of an entire process of living, stretching from youth to old age. And if one wants to live longer and healthier, one must begin with the most basic foundations. When talking about diet and longevity, there is one very concrete issue that cannot be avoided, and that is body weight. Many people think that being a little overweight is not a problem. They believe that having some extra fat means looking healthier, having more substance, and having more strength. But from a biological perspective, being overweight or obese is one of the clearest factors that shortens lifespan. When the body stores too much fat, that fat does not simply sit there. Adipose tissue is an endocrine organ. It secretes many substances that cause low-grade, chronic inflammation. This low-grade inflammation does not cause immediate pain. It does not cause immediate fever, but it silently affects the entire body. Inflammation increases oxidative stress. Oxidative stress damages DNA. DNA damage causes telomeres to erode more rapidly. In addition, excess body fat raises blood glucose levels, increases insulin levels, and promotes insulin resistance. When blood sugar remains high over time, cells must work harder to process that glucose. Working harder means aging faster. It is no coincidence that obesity is often accompanied by many chronic diseases, diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and fatty liver disease. These conditions do not only reduce quality of life, they erode lifespan year by year. There is a very blunt saying, which may sound harsh, but is biologically accurate. A large waistline means a shorter lifespan. This is not a curse. It is a biological summary. A large waistline means excess visceral fat. Visceral fat is the most dangerous type of fat because it surrounds the liver, pancreas, and intestines, directly disrupting metabolism. When metabolism is disrupted, the entire cellular system is placed under prolonged stress. And as discussed earlier, chronic stress accelerates telomere shortening. That is why weight management is not an aesthetic issue. It is a longevity issue. The goal is not to be thin for appearance. The goal is to prevent the body from entering premature aging. This becomes even more important when viewed over the long term. A person who becomes obese early in life will find it very difficult to maintain a healthy body later on. A person who eats without control from a young age will struggle greatly to reverse the habit later. The body has inertia. Once it becomes accustomed to excess energy intake, even a small increase in food can lead to weight gain. As weight increases, movement becomes harder. Fatigue appears more easily. Motivation declines more quickly. If this cycle is not recognized early, it will lead to serious consequences for health and lifespan. Therefore, managing body weight is one of the most important foundations for living a long life. There is no need for extreme dieting. There is no need to force oneself to be overly thin. It is enough to keep the body in a balanced state without prolonged excess energy. From here, the discussion moves to another factor that is equally important, and that is physical activity, because diet and movement always go hand in hand. When body weight is mentioned, it is impossible not to talk about movement. Eating is only half of the story. The other half lies in whether the body is being used or not. The human body, if it is not used, will automatically deteriorate. Muscles that are not used will shrink. Bones that are not loaded will lose density. The heart, if not stimulated, will gradually weaken. This is not disease. It is a biological law. Many people believe that as they grow older, they should rest more, limit movement, and save energy. But in reality, the opposite is true. The less a person moves, the faster the body weakens. Muscle is a very special organ. Its function is not limited to movement or lifting objects. Muscle is also a reservoir of protein. It plays a critical role in regulating blood sugar. It is a central component of the body's metabolic system. When muscles are active, they send positive signals throughout the body. Blood glucose is used more efficiently. Insulin works more effectively. Chronic inflammation decreases. When these processes function well, cells are not forced into prolonged stress. In other words, physical activity slows biological aging. If one observes elderly individuals who live long lives, a very clear common point emerges. They still have muscle, not large, bulky muscles like young athletes, but enough muscle mass to perform daily activities. They can walk. They can stand up and sit down without assistance. They can take care of themselves. That alone reduces a great deal of biological stress, because as long as a person can move, they are not dependent on others. And when one is not dependent, the mind is more stable. When the mind is more stable, stress hormones decrease. And as discussed earlier, lower stress hormone levels mean slower telomere erosion. By contrast, when muscle mass declines, a very dangerous cycle begins. Less movement leads to weakness. Weakness leads to fear of falling. Fear of falling leads to even less movement. This cycle accelerates aging dramatically, even if biological age has not yet caught up. Therefore, physical activity is not about athletic performance. It is about maintaining independence. There is no need for intense training. There is no need for complicated exercises. What matters is consistency. Walking every day, doing household tasks, gentle but regular movement. These activities remind the body that it is still being used. And because of that, degeneration slows down. When discussing diet, physical activity, and body weight, there is one more factor that may seem very ordinary, yet strongly determines the speed at which the body ages, and that is sleep. Many people underestimate sleep. Some believe that sleeping a little less is not a problem, as long as they can still function during the day. Others believe that sleep problems in old age are inevitable, and therefore not worth paying attention to. But from a biological perspective, sleep is the time when the body repairs itself. During the day, humans think, work, move, and face many forms of stress. During these activities, cells continuously sustain small injuries. These injuries are not severe enough to cause disease immediately, but they accumulate over time. And the time for the body to deal with these injuries is at night, during deep sleep. When a person enters deep sleep, brain activity decreases, heart rate slows down, blood pressure drops, the body shifts into a recovery state. At that time, many beneficial hormones are released, especially growth hormone. This hormone is not only for children. In adults, growth hormone plays a role in tissue repair, cell regeneration, and slowing down aging. If sleep is insufficient or fragmented, the deep sleep phase is shortened. As a result, the body does not have enough time to carry out repairs. Small injuries remain unresolved. Day after day, these unresolved injuries accumulate, and the result is that the body ages faster than its chronological age. Poor sleep also increases cortisol levels. High cortisol at night is a very bad signal. It indicates that the body is still in a stress state when it should be resting. High cortisol leads to increased oxidative stress. Oxidative stress accelerates telomere erosion. That is why people who suffer from long-term insomnia often look older than their age. Their skin appears dull. Their eyes look sunken. Their mental state is exhausted, not because they work harder, but because their bodies are not properly restored. In older adults, sleep patterns often change naturally. They fall asleep earlier. They wake up earlier. Their sleep becomes lighter. This is part of natural aging. However, if sleep becomes severely disrupted, with sleepless nights or reversed day-night rhythms, the speed of aging increases significantly. Therefore, maintaining good sleep is not a luxury. It is a longevity strategy. One does not need to sleep excessively long, but one needs deep restorative sleep. Going to bed at regular times, avoiding strong stimulation before sleep, allowing the mind to settle. When sleep is good, the body does the rest. And when all the points discussed so far are put together, a very clear picture emerges. Longevity is not a random phenomenon. Longevity is also not determined solely by genetics. Longevity is the result of how a person lives every single day, eating in moderation, moving regularly, maintaining a healthy body weight, reducing stress, sleeping sufficiently and deeply. None of these make a person immortal, but they help a person move closer to the best biological limit that their body can achieve. And that is the true meaning of understanding longevity. Not to fear aging, not to desperately chase a longer life at any cost, but to live fully, healthily, and lately in each stage of life. Thank you for watching this program. I will stop here. Goodbye, and I look forward to seeing you again in future programs.